With just $850 left in his checking account and facing eviction from his cramped apartment, Jack Reynolds made what everyone in his life called a desperate mistake, purchasing a dilapidated 19th century farmhouse that the county couldn't even give away. The roof leaked in a dozen places, the foundation was crumbling, and locals whispered the place was cursed. But what Jack would uncover behind the cracked stones of the ancient fireplace would not only change his life forever, but would solve a historical mystery that had puzzled scholars for over a century and lead the governor himself to visit the property. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jack Reynolds stared at his bank account balance displayed on his phone, $850, 43s. Just 3 years ago, he had been running a successful construction company with 15 employees, a comfortable 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, and a retirement account that grew steadily each quarter. Now at 42, he was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Millsville, Pennsylvania, carefully stretching every dollar and watching his dreams of rebuilding his business fade with each passing month. The economic downturn had hit the construction industry particularly hard in western Pennsylvania. First came the cancelled contracts, then the layoffs he'd tried desperately to avoid, and finally the painful decision to close the business entirely. The housing market crash had left him with debts he couldn't service and skills that suddenly seemed surplus to requirements in a region where new building had all but stopped. His marriage to Rebecca hadn't survived the financial collapse. After 15 years together, she had taken their son Noah and moved out, unable to weather the stress of watching their middle-class security evaporate. "I can't keep living with the uncertainty, Jack," she had said, boxes packed in the hallway of the home they could no longer afford. "Noah needs stability. He needs to know where his next meal is coming from and that he'll have a roof over his head next month." Those words haunted Jack daily. His son's weekly visits only deepened his sense of failure. Noah's questions about when they could move back into a house with a yard for his dog, questions Jack couldn't answer, were painful reminders of how much ground he'd lost. His construction clients had disappeared, and the few jobs he could pick up as a handyman barely covered his rent and child support payments. Pride was the one thing Jack had managed to hold on to. He had refused offers of loans from his younger sister in Ohio, a nurse whose career was thriving. He was determined to rebuild on his own terms, to create something tangible that would make his son proud again and prove to himself that his life wasn't defined by a single business failure. As Jack sat in his pickup truck outside the Westmoreland County Administration building, an October wind rattled dead leaves across the parking lot. He had come across a notice for an upcoming property auction while searching online for handyman gigs. Most of the listings were for foreclosed homes with opening bids far beyond his means, but one property caught his attention: the old Hargrove farmhouse outside Pinewood Valley, with a minimum bid listed at just $800. Jack had grown up in Pinewood Valley before moving to Millsville after high school. The Hargrove place had been abandoned even then, a local landmark more for cautionary tales than historical significance. Stories circulated among teenagers about the haunted Hargrove house, though Jack had never believed in such nonsense. What he did know about construction told him the property was likely a complete teardown, which explained the rock-bottom asking price. The listing was brutally honest: 5-acre property with uninhabitable 1876 farmhouse, significant structural damage, no utilities connected, property sold as is, buyer responsible for all repairs or demolition, back taxes cleared by county foreclosure. Any rational person with construction knowledge would have dismissed it immediately. Jack had spent his career evaluating properties, and even at $800, this one had "Money Pit" written all over it. but something about this particular farmhouse pulled at him. Perhaps it was desperation, perhaps nostalgia for his hometown, or perhaps the small voice reminding him that with his background in construction, he might see potential where others saw only ruin. He researched the property that night in his apartment. The Hargrove farmhouse had been built by Samuel Hargrove, a moderately successful farmer in the post-Civil War era. The property had remained in the Hargrove family until the 1950s, when the last direct descendant died without heirs. It had changed hands several times thereafter, with each successive owner making fewer improvements until it was finally abandoned in the early 1990s. The county had seized it for unpaid taxes 15 years ago, but had never found a buyer willing to take on the rehabilitation costs. There were no particular historical notes of interest, no famous visitors, no significant events, nothing to suggest the property held any value beyond the land itself. Yet Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was an opportunity. Perhaps his last one before he'd be forced to leave the area entirely in search of work. The next morning, Jack arrived at the auction 20 minutes early, clutching a cashier's check for $850. Almost everything he had left. The auction room was sparsely populated, mostly with developers and investors looking for profitable opportunities. When the auctioneer announced the Hargrove property, a quiet ripple of chuckles moved through the room. Next, we have parcel 47C, the Hargrove farmhouse and surrounding 5 acres on Old Mill Road, Pinewood Valley. Opening bid is $800. The auctioneer's voice held a note of resignation, as if he already knew this would be yet another failed attempt to offload the property. Jack raised his bidder card. $800, he called out, his voice steadier than he expected. The auctioneer looked surprised that anyone had bid at all. I have $800 from bidder 17. Do I have $850? The room remained silent. A few people glanced at Jack with expressions ranging from amusement to pity. Going once at $800. Going twice. Sold to bidder 17 for $800. And just like that, Jack had become a property owner again. As he completed the paperwork and handed over his cashier's check, the county clerk, a woman in her 60s with silver-rimmed glasses, leaned forward with concern in her eyes. Mr. Reynolds, I feel obligated to ask if you've actually seen this property in person. Not recently, Jack admitted, but I grew up in Pinewood Valley. I know the house. She hesitated. That place has been abandoned for decades. The last inspector who went out there said the second floor wasn't even safe to walk on. I just want to make sure you understand what you've purchased. Jack nodded, appreciating her concern, but feeling a flicker of irritation nonetheless. I was in construction for 20 years. I know what I'm getting into. The clerk seemed unconvinced, but stamped his deed anyway. Well, I hope you find whatever you're looking for out there. The keys were lost years ago, but I doubt the locks work anymore anyway. The property is yours effective immediately. As Jack drove the 45 minutes from Millsville to Pinewood Valley, doubt began to creep in. What had he done? He had just spent nearly all of his remaining money on a property that would cost tens of thousands to make habitable. Money he didn't have. The rational part of his brain, the experienced contractor who had evaluated hundreds of properties, was screaming that this had been a catastrophic error in judgment. When he finally turned onto Old Mill Road, the gravel crunching under his tires, the reality of his situation hit home. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The driveway was barely visible, overgrown with weeds and young saplings that scraped the sides of his truck. As he rounded the final bend, the Hargrove farmhouse came into view, and Jack's heart sank. The 2-story farmhouse stood in a small clearing, surrounded by encroaching forest that had reclaimed much of the once open farmland. The white clapboard siding had long since faded to a dull grey, with large sections missing entirely. The front porch sagged dangerously to one side, and several windows were broken or boarded over. The roof, once a dignified slate, now resembled a patchwork quilt of missing shingles and exposed beams. Jack sat in his truck for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what he now owned. Even with his skills, this was a monumental project that would require materials he couldn't afford, and time he should be spending finding steady work. What had he been thinking? With a deep breath, he grabbed his flashlight and tool belt. Habits from his contracting days, and approached the house. The front door hung awkwardly on a single hinge, swinging in the autumn breeze. As Jack stepped into the main foyer, the floorboards creaked ominously beneath his feet. The interior was a study in decay. Water damage had left dark stains across the ceiling and walls. Peeling wallpaper hung in strips, revealing layers of previous designs that charted the decades of the home's history. Animal droppings scattered. The floor, evidence of the various creatures that had made the abandoned structure their home over the years. Proceeding cautiously, Jack began a methodical inspection of the first floor. His contractor's eye automatically cataloging issues. Rotted floor joists here, termite damage there, a collapsed section of ceiling in what had once been a dining room. The kitchen still contained an ancient cast-iron stove, rusted beyond salvation. Cabinet doors hung from broken hinges, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. Despite the overwhelming problems, Jack noted that the basic structure, the bones of the house, remained surprisingly solid in places. The foundation, while cracked in sections, was built from large local stones that had weathered the years reasonably well. The main support beams, hand-hewn from old-growth oak, showed little sign of the insect damage that plagued the rest of the structure. As the afternoon sun began to lower, casting long shadows through the broken windows, Jack found himself in what had once been the main living room. At the center of the far wall stood a massive stone fireplace, its hearth large enough to roast a small pig. Unlike much of the house, the fireplace appeared remarkably intact, its craftsmanship evident even beneath years of soot and neglect. Jack ran his hand along the rough stones, admiring the workmanship. As a builder himself, he could appreciate the skill it had taken to construct something so enduring. His fingers traced the mortar lines, feeling for structural weaknesses out. Of professional habit, when he reached the mantelpiece, a single slab of granite that must have weighed hundreds of pounds, he noticed something unusual. The mantel wasn't quite level. To most eyes, the difference would be imperceptible, but Jack's trained perspective caught it immediately. The right side was approximately half an inch lower than the left. In a structure where everything else was obviously askew due to settling and decay, this particular imperfection stood out precisely because it seemed intentional, rather than the result of time and gravity. Jack tapped the underside of the mantel, hearing a solid sound on the left, but a slightly different, hollower tone on the right. Intrigued, he examined the stonework more closely. The stones on the right side of the fireplace were the same type as the others, but looking carefully, he noticed subtle differences in the mortar, slightly different coloration and texture, as though they had been reset at some point. "That's odd," he murmured to himself, his voice echoing slightly in the empty room. Jack returned to his truck and retrieved a more powerful flashlight and a small pry bar. Back at the fireplace, he shined the light into every crevice of the right side, looking for anything unusual. After several minutes of examination, his persistence was rewarded when the beam illuminated what appeared to be a small, rusty metal lever recessed between two stones near the floor, almost invisible. Against the darkened stone, heart beating faster, Jack carefully worked the tip of the pry bar into the narrow gap and applied gentle pressure. For a moment, nothing happened. and he wondered if he was simply seeing patterns where none existed. A desperate man finding mystery in ordinary decay because he needed something, anything, to justify his impulsive purchase. Then, with a grinding sound that raised dust from years of disuse, the metal lever shifted. A mechanism somewhere inside the wall activated with a dull clunk, and to Jack's astonishment, a 2-foot section of the stone facing on the right side of the fireplace swung inward like a door, revealing a dark space beyond. "Holy shit," Jack whispered, flashlight beam trembling slightly as he directed it into the opening. The light revealed a small chamber built into the thickness of the chimney wall. Not much larger than a closet, but deep enough for a person to stand inside. Metal shelving lined the back wall, holding what appeared to be stacks of books or ledgers, several wooden boxes, and a number of smaller objects Jack couldn't immediately identify. For a moment, Jack stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. People didn't build secret chambers in ordinary farmhouses, at least not without good reason. Was this some kind of safe room? A hiding place for valuables? Or something else entirely? Cautiously, Jack ducked his head and stepped into the chamber. The air was stale but remarkably dry, protected from the moisture that had damaged so much of the house. He directed his flashlight at the nearest shelf, illuminating a row of leather-bound books. Carefully, he removed one and opened it to find handwritten text in faded brown ink, dated July 18th, 1863. The third group arrived after midnight. 6 souls, a mother, father, 3 children, and an elderly man who could barely walk. Hargrove brought them from the Miller station in the false-bottom wagon. The youngest child, a girl of perhaps 4 years, had a terrible cough that worried us greatly. Mrs. H. prepared a poultice and tended to her through the night. They will rest here 3 days before the journey north continues. May Providence guide their path to freedom. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the significance of what he was reading dawned on him. This wasn't just a journal. It was a record of Underground Railroad activities. The Hargrove farmhouse, this seemingly unremarkable property that no one had wanted, had once been a station in the secret network helping enslaved people escape to freedom before and during the Civil War. With shaking hands, Jack carefully replaced the journal and examined other items in the hidden chamber. Another book appeared to be a ledger with encoded entries, names replaced by numbers, destinations by symbols. A wooden box contained old coins, some American and others foreign. Another held a small collection of personal items, a tarnished locket with a tiny daguerreotype inside, a hand-carved wooden toy soldier, a woman's embroidered handkerchief, perhaps mementos left behind by those passing through. Most significantly, rolled carefully in a protective metal tube, Jack found maps of the region with marked routes, safe houses identified by cryptic symbols, and danger areas to be avoided. If authentic, these documents represented an incredibly rare and detailed record of Underground Railroad operations, something historians had few examples of, as the secretive nature of the network meant that written records were dangerous and therefore seldom kept. Jack carefully photographed everything with his phone before touching any more items, instinctively understanding that he had stumbled upon something of historical significance. As darkness fell outside and the old house creaked around him, he sat on the dusty floor beside the secret chamber, scrolling through the photos and trying to comprehend how completely his life had changed in a single day. He had spent his last $800 on what everyone, including himself, had considered a worthless, dilapidated farmhouse. Now he found himself the custodian of what might be a priceless historical discovery, documents and artifacts that could fill gaps in the historical record about a crucial period in American history. Jack's thoughts turned to his son Noah, who had developed a passionate interest in history after a school project on the Civil War last year. How Noah's eyes would light up when he saw this. physical evidence of the courage and compassion of ordinary people risking everything to help others reach freedom. For the first time in years, Jack felt a sense of purpose stronger than his financial concerns. Whatever happened next, he needed to ensure these materials were properly preserved and their significance recognized. As he carefully secured the hidden chamber and prepared to leave, Jack realized that his impulsive purchase might not have been so irrational after all. Perhaps some combination of his contractor's eye for structural anomalies and a subconscious recognition of the property's potential had guided him to this moment. Or perhaps, as his more superstitious neighbors might suggest, the house itself had been waiting for someone who would discover its secrets and understand their importance. Driving back to his apartment in Millsville that night, Jack made two decisions. First thing tomorrow, he would contact Dr. Amelia Garcia, a professor of American history at Keystone State University, whose name he remembered from a newspaper article about her work documenting the Underground Railroad in western Pennsylvania. Second, he would call his ex-wife Rebecca and ask if Noah could spend the upcoming weekend with him at the farmhouse. It was time to show his son that sometimes the greatest treasures were hidden in what others had abandoned as worthless. What Jack couldn't possibly know as he drove through the darkness, his mind racing with possibilities, was that the contents of that hidden chamber would eventually draw national attention, secure the farmhouse's designation as a protected historical landmark, provide the cornerstone for a regional heritage museum, and most importantly, restore his sense of purpose and connection to his family. The journey ahead would not be without challenges, authenticating the documents, protecting them from deterioration, and navigating the bureaucracy of historical preservation. But for the first time in 3 years, Jack Reynolds drove toward his future with hope rather than resignation. Jack woke early the next morning, his dreams filled with hidden passages and whispered secrets. Before even making coffee, he called the history department at Keystone State University, asking for Dr. Amelia Garcia. After navigating a maze of extensions and voicemails, he managed to leave a carefully worded message explaining that he had purchased the Hargrove property and discovered historical documents that might relate to her research on the Underground Railroad. Next, he called Rebecca. Their conversations since the divorce had been strained, limited mainly to logistics about Noah's visits and child support payments. When she answered, her voice carried the wariness that had become customary between them. "I bought a house," Jack said without preamble, knowing how it would sound. A long silence followed before Rebecca responded. "You what? Jack, you can barely make rent. Please tell me you didn't do something reckless with the little money you have left." "It's the old Hargrove place outside Pinewood Valley. I got it at the county auction for $800. That abandoned farmhouse. Jack, that place is falling apart. What were you thinking?" Jack took a deep breath. "I found something there, Becca. Something important. Historical documents hidden in a secret compartment in the fireplace. Records from the Underground Railroad." Another pause, longer this time. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice had softened slightly. "Are you serious? That's actually pretty incredible if it's true. I'm waiting to hear back from a historian at Keystone State, but I'm sure about what I found." Jack hesitated. "I'd like Noah to see it this weekend. He's been so interested in Civil War history lately. This would mean a lot to him." Rebecca sighed. "The house is safe enough for him to visit? You're not going to have him sleeping in some condemned building, are you?" "I'll clear out a safe area on the first floor. We can bring sleeping bags, make it like camping. I want him to be part of this, to see that sometimes taking risks pays off." "All right," Rebecca finally agreed. "Finally. But I'm coming too, at least for the initial visit. I want to see this place for myself before leaving Noah there overnight." After hanging up, Jack headed straight back to Pinewood Valley. He spent the morning carefully documenting every item, in the hidden chamber, creating a detailed inventory. By mid-afternoon, his phone rang with a number from the university. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Dr. Amelia Garcia. I got your message about the Hargrove farmhouse." Her voice was precise and carried a hint of skepticism. "You mentioned finding underground railroad documents." "Yes, in a hidden chamber behind the fireplace. There are journals, coded ledgers, maps with marked routes. They date back to at least 1863, maybe earlier." "Mr. Reynolds, I should tell you that claims like this are fairly common. Many old houses in this region have legends attached to them about underground railroad connections, but documented evidence is exceedingly rare. Most of these claims don't stand up to historical scrutiny." "I understand your skepticism," Jack replied, "but I've emailed you some photos of what I found. Could you take a look and then decide if it's worth your time to visit?" There was a pause, presumably as Dr. Garcia checked her emails. Then a sharp intake of breath. These look potentially authentic at first glance. The journal format, the ink, the coded entries. "Mr. Reynolds, if these are genuine, this is a significant find. I could come tomorrow morning to examine everything in person." Jack spent the rest of the day clearing debris from the living room and reinforcing the most unstable sections of flooring. He pitched a small tent in the corner farthest from any water damage, a place where he and Noah could sleep if Rebecca agreed to let him stay. Despite his exhaustion, excitement kept him working well into the evening. The next morning, Jack met Dr. Garcia at the property. She was a petite woman in her late 40s, with dark hair streaked with silver and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She carried a large case of equipment and wore sturdy boots appropriate for the dilapidated site. "The structural damage is extensive," she noted as Jack led her through the house. "How did you know to look behind the fireplace?" "Construction background," Jack explained. "The stonework on that side showed signs of having been reset at some point, and the mantel wasn't quite level. Those kinds of details stand out if you've built houses for a living." When they reached the fireplace, Jack demonstrated how to activate the hidden lever. Dr. Garcia's professional reserve broke momentarily as the stone panel swung open, revealing the secret chamber. "Extraordinary," she whispered, stepping carefully into the space. For the next several hours, Dr. Garcia meticulously examined each document, taking photographs under special lights, measuring dimensions, and making detailed notes. She handled everything with cotton gloves, explaining to Jack the importance of preserving these fragile materials. Based on the paper composition, ink type, handwriting style, and contextual details, these appear to be genuine mid-19th century documents, she finally concluded. The journal entries align with what we know about underground railroad operations in this region, but provide much more specific information than we've had before. The maps are particularly valuable. Very few cartographic records of the underground. Railroad survived for obvious reasons of secrecy. Jack felt a surge of vindication. So they're historically significant? Mr. Reynolds, significant barely begins to cover it. This is potentially one of the most complete and well-preserved collections of underground railroad documentation ever discovered. The historical community has long suspected that Western Pennsylvania had numerous safe houses, but concrete evidence has been scarce. These materials could fill massive gaps in our understanding. Dr. Garcia carefully closed one of the journals. "What are your plans for these materials?" Jack hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know yet. Make sure they're preserved, obviously. Beyond that," he shrugged. "These items belong in a museum or university archive where they can be properly conserved and made available to researchers." She hesitated. Various institutions would likely be interested in acquiring them, potentially for substantial sums. The mention of money gave Jack pause. His financial situation was dire, and the historical artifacts might represent a way out of his financial hole. But something about the idea of selling them felt wrong. "I need to think about it," he said finally. "These documents have been hidden away for over 150 years. A few more days won't hurt." Dr. Garcia nodded. "I respect that. But please, until you decide, keep the chamber sealed and maintain stable temperature and humidity as much as possible in this area of the house. Exposure to fluctuating conditions could cause deterioration." After she left, Jack sat on the porch steps, watching the afternoon sun filter through the trees surrounding the property. Tomorrow, Rebecca and Noah would visit. His son would be the next person after Dr. Garcia to see the hidden documents. The thought filled Jack with an unexpected warmth. Regardless of what eventually happened to the artifacts, he had discovered something meaningful, something that connected the past to the present. For the first time in years, he felt he had something valuable to share with his son. The next day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect October Saturday. Jack had risen at dawn to continue clearing debris and making the farmhouse as presentable as possible, given its condition. He had swept the floors, removed the more dangerous hanging elements, and set up a small table and chairs salvaged from less damaged rooms. When he heard tires on the gravel driveway, his heart rate quickened. The blue sedan that pulled up contained the two people whose opinions mattered most to him. Noah leaped out first, his 14-year-old energy uncontainable, his eyes wide as he took in the dilapidated farmhouse. "Dad, this place is awesome. It looks haunted." His enthusiasm was genuine, making Jack smile despite his nervousness about Rebecca's reaction. She emerged from the car more slowly, surveying the property with the critical eye of someone who had once shared a life with a contractor. "Oh, Jack," she said softly, but not unkindly. "You've certainly taken on a project here." "I know it. Looks rough," Jack admitted, "but the foundation is mostly solid and the main supports are still good. It's not as hopeless as it seems." Rebecca didn't look convinced, but Noah was already racing toward the house. "Can we go inside? Is there really a secret room? Did you find treasure?" Jack laughed, following his son. "Yes, we can go inside carefully, and yes, there's a secret room, but what I found isn't exactly treasure, at least not the kind with gold coins. Historical artifacts are way cooler than gold coins anyway," Noah declared with the confidence of a teenager who had discovered his passion. "My history teacher says primary sources are priceless." Jack caught Rebecca's eye over their son's head, and for a brief moment they shared something they hadn't in years, a proud smile at the thoughtful young man their son was becoming. Inside, Jack gave them a tour, pointing out features of the original 1876 construction that remained intact despite the overall decay. Noah asked insightful questions about the building techniques of the era, while Rebecca noted areas where water damage had compromised the structure. "The roof needs to be completely replaced before winter," she said, professional teacher instincts kicking in as she assessed the situation. "If more water gets in during snowmelt, you'll lose what's still salvageable of the second floor." Jack nodded, appreciating her practical advice rather than taking it as criticism. "I've got some tarps in the truck I'm going to put up today, as a temporary measure." Finally, they reached the living room with its massive stone fireplace. Noah immediately rushed to it, running his hands over the weathered stones as Jack had done. "Is this where the secret door is? How does it work? Can I open it?" Jack showed him the hidden lever, and Noah's face lit up with delight as the stone panels swung open. "This is the coolest thing ever. It's like something from a movie." Even Rebecca looked impressed. "I have to admit, Jack, when you said secret compartment, I pictured something much smaller. This is remarkable." Carefully, Jack brought out some of the documents to show them, explaining what Dr. Garcia had told him about their historical significance. Noah handled the items with surprising gentleness, his expression solemn as he realized the importance of what he was seeing. "These people passed through here," he asked, pointing to coded entries in one of the ledgers, "escaping from slavery." "That's what the journals suggest," Jack confirmed. "The Hargrove family was apparently part of the Underground Railroad network. They hid people here before helping them continue north toward Canada." "They were heroes," Noah said simply, standing up for what was right, even though it was dangerous. Rebecca had been examining the maps with interest. These would have been incredibly dangerous documents to keep at the time. If they'd been discovered, the Hargroves could have faced severe consequences. "Which explains the hidden chamber," Jack said. "According to Dr. Garcia, most Underground Railroad operators destroyed any documentation to protect themselves and those they helped. Finding preserved records like these is extremely rare." They spent the afternoon going through the documents together, with Noah taking careful notes for what he immediately declared would be the best history project ever. Rebecca, too, seemed genuinely engaged, her initial skepticism about Jack's purchase gradually giving way to appreciation for the historical significance of the discovery. As evening approached, Jack fired up a small camp stove he'd brought, preparing a simple dinner outside on the porch. The October air was turning chilly, but the mood remained warm as they discussed the farmhouse and its secrets. "So, what happens now?" Rebecca asked as they finished eating. "With the documents, I mean." Jack sighed. "I'm not entirely sure. Dr. Garcia suggested they belong in a museum or university archive. She mentioned that institutions might pay for them, which honestly would help with my financial situation." "But you don't want to sell them," Noah said. Not a question, but a statement. He knew his father well. "They don't feel like mine to sell," Jack admitted. "I found them, but they're part of this place's history, part of our region's history." Rebecca studied him thoughtfully. "You're thinking of restoring the house, aren't you? Making it into some kind of historical site." Jack hadn't fully admitted this plan even to himself, but hearing Rebecca say it aloud crystallized the idea that had been forming in his mind. "It would take money I don't have right now. But yes, eventually, that's what I'd like to do. This place deserves to be preserved, not just for the artifacts, but for what happened here. Those stories shouldn't be forgotten." Noah looked between his parents. "I want to help," he said firmly. "I could come on weekends. I'm pretty good at painting and stuff." Jack felt a tightness in his throat. "I'd like that, buddy." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "It's a massive undertaking, Jack, but..." She looked around at the property, now bathed in the golden light of sunset. "I can see why you're drawn to it. There's something special here, and it would be an amazing educational opportunity for Noah." That night, with Rebecca's blessing, Noah stayed at the farmhouse with Jack. They set up sleeping bags in the small tent Jack had pitched in the living room, and by flashlight, Jack read aloud from one of the journals, entries carefully selected to be age-appropriate while still conveying the courage of both those escaping slavery and those helping them. As Noah drifted off to sleep, Jack lay awake, listening to the creaks and settles of the old house around them. The financial challenges of restoring the property remained daunting, but for the first time since his business had failed, he felt a sense of purpose stronger than his fears. This forgotten farmhouse with its hidden chamber had already begun restoring something he'd lost long before he'd ever heard of the Hargrove place. His belief that he could build something meaningful, something that would last. Monday morning brought a call from Dr. Garcia. "Mr. Reynolds, I've consulted with several colleagues about your discovery. We'd like to bring a small team to properly document everything and discuss preservation options. Would that be acceptable?" Jack agreed, and 2 days later the Hargrove farmhouse hosted its first formal historical assessment. Dr. Garcia arrived with a university archivist, a preservation specialist, and a historian specializing in 19th century African American history. They spent an entire day meticulously cataloging every item in the hidden chamber, creating digital scans of documents and discussing the historical context. These materials substantially alter our understanding of Underground Railroad operations in western Pennsylvania, Dr. Evelyn Wright, the African American history specialist, explained as they reviewed the findings. The level of organization shown in these records suggests a much more structured network than previously documented in this region. Walter Simmons, an 83-year-old resident of Pinewood Valley, whom Jack had invited after learning he was distantly related to one of the families mentioned in the journals, provided additional context from local oral histories. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the Hargroves," he recalled, said they were good Christian folks who didn't talk much but always had room at their table for strangers passing through. Now, I understand what she meant. By the end of the day, the academic team had reached several conclusions. First, the documents were authentic and of exceptional historical value. Second, the farmhouse itself, as a verified Underground Railroad station with original architectural features intact, merited consideration for historical landmark status. And third, proper preservation would require significant resources. There are grants available for historical preservation, Dr. Garcia explained. The State Historical Preservation Office administers several programs that might apply to your situation. With your permission, we'd like to help you apply. Jack readily agreed, though he harbored doubts about the bureaucratic process. He'd dealt with enough government paperwork during his construction days to know that such things moved at a glacial pace, and winter was approaching fast. The house needed immediate interventions to prevent further deterioration. Word of the discovery spread quickly through the academic community and then to local media. A week after the assessment team's visit, a reporter from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette arrived to interview Jack and photograph the farmhouse and a few selected items from the hidden chamber. The resulting article, titled "Contractor's Last Ditch: Purchase Reveals Underground Railroad Secrets," appeared on the front page of the Sunday edition. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. By Monday morning, Jack had received dozens of calls and emails from historical societies, museums, preservation groups, and curious citizens. Some offered assistance with restoration, others wanted to visit the site, and a few represented institutions interested in acquiring the documents. Among the calls was one from Thomas Blackwood at the State Historical Preservation Office. "Mr. Reynolds, we've received an expedited application for historical designation for the Hargrove farmhouse. Given the significance of your discovery and the media attention, we'd like to schedule an on-site evaluation as soon as possible." The official visit took place the following week. Blackwood, a serious man with a precise manner, conducted a thorough inspection of both the property and the artifacts. "The historical significance is undeniable," he concluded. "The documentation here is among the most comprehensive ever discovered related to Underground Railroad activities. The farmhouse itself, despite its condition, retains enough original features to merit preservation." He outlined the next steps. The property would be recommended for state historical designation, making it eligible for preservation grants. The process normally took months, but given the exceptional circumstances and growing public interest, it was being expedited. "In the meantime," Blackwood advised, "securing the structure against winter weather is critical. Have you considered temporary protective measures?" Jack explained his limited resources, but mentioned that several local contractors had offered materials and labor after reading the newspaper article. "We're planning a community workday this weekend to install a temporary roof covering and board up the most vulnerable areas." Blackwood nodded approvingly. Community involvement is excellent. It demonstrates local support, which strengthens the case for preservation funding. The first community workday exceeded Jack's expectations. More than 30 people showed up, including several of his former employees, bringing tools, materials, and refreshments. Rebecca arrived with Noah and a group of his classmates, all eager to help with what they considered a real-life history project. By sundown, the Hargrove farmhouse had a new tarp roof secured against winter winds, properly boarded windows, and temporary supports installed in several critical areas. The volunteers had also cleared years of debris from the yard, revealing the original stone walkways and the remnants of a kitchen garden. As the group gathered around a bonfire to warm up after their work, Walter Simmons shared stories passed down through generations about the Hargrove family and the community's dimly remembered suspicions about their nighttime activities. Looking back, the old man reflected, the signs were all there in the stories. Wagons arriving after dark, extra food always being prepared, the family's reluctance to have casual visitors. Our ancestors knew something important was happening here, even if the details were kept secret. Jack felt a growing connection not just to the physical structure he'd purchased, but to its place in the community's history. The farmhouse wasn't simply an abandoned building he'd acquired out of desperation. It was a site where ordinary people had performed extraordinary acts of courage and compassion, risking everything to help others reach freedom. November brought the first snowfall and official word that the Hargrove farmhouse had received preliminary approval for historical designation. With this came access to emergency preservation funds, not enough for full restoration, but sufficient to stabilize the structure and protect the historical materials through the winter. Jack hired 2 of his former employees to help with the stabilization work, feeling a deep satisfaction at being able to provide even temporary employment. Together, they installed proper weatherproofing, repaired the most critical structural issues, and created a secure, climate-controlled space for the historical artifacts until more permanent arrangements could be made. Dr. Garcia and her team continued their documentation work, now with university funding. Each new journal entry and map they analyzed added details to the emerging picture of the Underground Railroad's operations in western Pennsylvania. The coded ledgers, once deciphered, revealed that the Hargrove station had helped more than 200 people on their journey to freedom between 1852 and 1865. What you found here changes the historical narrative, Dr. Garcia told Jack during one of her visits. It provides direct documentation of a network that operated largely in shadow. The personal items, the locket, the toy soldier, the handkerchief, they humanize history in a way that statistics and dates never can. For Jack, the most meaningful development was Noah's increasing involvement. His son now spent every weekend at the farmhouse, either helping with preservation work or assisting Dr. Garcia's team by photographing artifacts and organizing digital. In files, Noah's history teacher had approved an independent study project based on the Hargrove discovery, and the boy threw himself into the research with enthusiasm that warmed Jack's heart. Rebecca, too, had become a regular presence. Her initial skepticism had evolved into active support as she witnessed the property's transformation from abandoned ruin to emerging historical site. She organized groups of her students for educational visits and helped draft educational materials about the farmhouse's significance. "You know," she said to Jack one Sunday evening as they watched Noah carefully scanning journal pages, "when you told me you'd bought this place, I thought it was just another impulsive decision. I was wrong. This is exactly what you needed. Project with purpose that uses all your skills." Jack nodded, understanding what she meant. The farmhouse renovation combined his construction knowledge with a newfound appreciation for history and education. More importantly, It had reconnected him with his son and created a new, more positive relationship with Rebecca. "I got lucky," he admitted. "I bought this place because it was all I could afford, not because I had any idea what was hidden here." Rebecca smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe you saw something in this old place that everyone else missed, just like you noticed that uneven mantelpiece when no one else had for decades." As December arrived, bringing holiday decorations to Pinewood Valley, Jack received an unexpected call from the governor's office. The historical significance of the Hargrove discovery had reached state-level attention, and the governor wanted to visit the site personally during an upcoming tour of Western Pennsylvania historical landmarks. "This is a tremendous opportunity," Thomas Blackwood explained when Jack called him for advice. "A gubernatorial visit virtually guarantees the remaining funding needed for full restoration. We should prepare a comprehensive presentation of both the artifacts and the restoration plans." The next 2 weeks were a flurry of activity as Jack, Noah, Dr. Garcia's team, and community volunteers prepared the farmhouse for its highest profile visitor. They created display boards documenting the discovery and its historical context, prepared a selection of the most significant artifacts for viewing, and developed a walking tour highlighting the property's connection to the underground railroad. The day of the governor's visit dawned bright and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the property in pristine white. Media crews arrived first, setting up equipment to document the event. Local officials gathered nervously, straightening ties and checking prepared remarks. Jack, dressed in the one suit he still owned from his contracting days, stood with Noah and Rebecca near the farmhouse entrance, trying to calm the butterflies in his stomach. When the gubernatorial motorcade pulled into the driveway, Jack was struck by the surreal nature of the moment. Less than 3 months ago, he had spent his last dollars on an abandoned farmhouse that no one wanted. Now the property was hosting the state's highest official and a contingent of media. Summer gave way to autumn, and the Hargrove farmhouse, historical site, settled into a rhythm of regular tours, educational programs, and ongoing research. Jack found himself growing into his role as site director with increasing confidence. The position provided him not only with financial stability, but with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since the early days of his construction business. On a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Jack had made his desperate bid at the county auction, he arrived early at the farmhouse. The site wasn't open to visitors on Mondays, giving staff time for maintenance and research. He unlocked the front door, now properly restored with period-appropriate hardware, and stepped into the quiet entrance hall. The transformation from the dilapidated structure he'd first entered to the meticulously restored historical landmark never failed to amaze him. Where there had been water damage and animal droppings, there were now informative displays and carefully preserved original features. The dangerous floors had been repaired or replaced with reclaimed period materials. The broken windows now contained handcrafted glass panes that matched the original 1876 specifications. Jack made his way to what had once been the kitchen and was now his office. Historical accuracy had been balanced with practical needs, while the room maintained its 19th century appearance. Discreet modern additions allowed for site administration. He was reviewing the week's tour schedule when his phone rang. "Jack Reynolds," he answered. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Elaine Cortez from the National Historical Registry." The woman's voice was brisk but warm. "I'm calling regarding your application for National Landmark status for the Hargrove site." Jack sat up straighter. The state designation had been secured months ago, but national recognition would bring additional resources and prominence. "Yes, we submitted that paperwork about 2 months ago." "Well, I'm pleased to inform you that our review committee has made an initial assessment and the Hargrove Underground Railroad station meets our criteria for historical significance. We'll need to schedule a final evaluation visit, but based on the documentation you've provided and the site's unique features, I anticipate a positive outcome." After arranging details for the upcoming evaluation, Jack hung up and sat back in his chair, a smile spreading across his face. National recognition would secure the farmhouse's future, regardless of potential changes in state funding priorities. It would also expand their ability to apply for federal grants to support educational programs. His moment of reflection was interrupted by a light knock at the door. Dr. Garcia entered, carrying a folder of documents and looking unusually excited. "Jack, you need to see this." She laid the folder on his desk and opened it to reveal photocopies of yellowed newspaper articles. Walter Simmons mentioned that his cousin works at the Pinewood Valley Historical Society. They've been digitizing their newspaper archives, and she found several items related to the Hargrove family that might explain how the secret chamber remained undiscovered for so long. Jack examined the first article, dated July 1892. It described a fire at the Hargrove farmhouse that had severely damaged the east wing, but had been contained before destroying the main structure. Subsequent articles detailed the renovation work, including extensive modifications to the main fireplace, which was damaged by water during firefighting efforts. "The timing is perfect," Dr. Garcia explained. "Based on our analysis of the hidden chamber, we estimated the last entries in the journals were from around 1865, after the Civil War ended. The chamber was likely sealed up deliberately when it was no longer needed, but the fire and subsequent repairs in 1892 would have further obscured any evidence of the hidden door." She pointed to a particular paragraph in one article. "Mr. James Hargrove, grandson of the original builder, has commissioned extensive stonework from Italian masons newly arrived in Pittsburgh, incorporating designs said to honor family traditions from the old country." "A perfect cover," Jack mused. He used the fire damage as an opportunity to have the fireplace completely redone, further disguising the secret chamber. The reference to family traditions might have been a subtle nod to their Underground Railroad activities. "Exactly," Dr. Garcia agreed. "And here's where it gets even more interesting." She pulled out another article from 1915 describing James Hargrove's funeral. It mentions that he was a keeper of family secrets who carried forward his grandfather's legacy of steadfast moral principle without seeking recognition or acclaim. It's coded language, but to anyone who knew about the family's involvement in the Underground Railroad, the meaning would have been clear. So, the knowledge of the chamber died with him. Not completely. Look at this. The final document was a deed transfer from 1952, when the last Hargrove descendant, an elderly woman named Margaret Hargrove Jenkins, sold the property. A handwritten note attached to the deed read, "The heart of this home contains a legacy of freedom that must never be forgotten. When the time is right, it will reveal itself to one who values truth above treasure." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. "That's almost prophetic." Dr. Garcia nodded. Margaret Jenkins had no children. The property changed hands several times after her, eventually falling into disrepair. But this note suggests she knew about the chamber and hoped it would someday be discovered by the right person. "And it remained hidden for another 70 years, Jack said quietly. "Until you came along," Dr. Garcia pointed out. "Someone who noticed what others had overlooked and recognized its value." The conversation stayed with Jack throughout the day as he handled administrative tasks and prepared for an upcoming school group visit. The idea that Margaret Jenkins had somehow anticipated the discovery of the secret chamber decades after Her death lent an almost mystical quality to his connection with the farmhouse. That evening, Noah arrived for his regular Monday visit. Now 15, he had grown taller over the past year and carried himself with a new confidence. His involvement with the Hargrove site had transformed him from a typical teenager into something of a local celebrity among his peers. His knowledge of Underground Railroad history rivaled that of many graduate students, and he had begun giving specialized tours to visiting school groups. "Dad, I've been researching more about Samuel Hargrove's early life," Noah announced as they walked the property together. "There's evidence he might have been influenced by Quaker abolitionists when he was young. That could explain why he got involved with the Underground Railroad." Jack listened as his son enthusiastically detailed his latest historical discoveries. Noah's passion for history had blossomed into serious academic ambition. He now talked about studying public history or museum studies in college, with dreams of working in historical preservation. "Dr. Garcia showed me the newspaper articles about the fire and renovation," Jack mentioned as they circled back toward the house. "It explains why the secret chamber remained hidden for so long." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "It's like the Hargroves created layers of protection for their secret. First the hidden door itself, then the deliberate renovation to further disguise it, then the passing down of just enough knowledge to keep the memory alive without revealing too much." "And the note Margaret Jenkins left with the deed in 1952, Jack added. "When the time is right, it will reveal itself to one who values truth above treasure." "That's you, Dad," Noah said simply. "When you found the chamber, you could have sold everything to a private collector. Instead, you made sure it was preserved for everyone." Jack felt a familiar warmth at his son's words. Of all the positive changes the past year had brought, his strengthened relationship with Noah remained the most precious. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Rebecca's car. Since the official opening of the historical site, she had become increasingly involved with educational programming, developing curriculum materials that connected the Hargrove station's history to broader themes of courage, moral principle, and civil rights. Her regular presence at the farmhouse had gradually evolved into something more personal as well, with frequent family dinners and shared weekend activities. "I brought dinner," she called, holding up bags of takeout from their favorite local restaurant, and some interesting news. Over chicken parmesan in what had once been the farmhouse dining room and was now a small conference area, Rebecca shared her news. "The school board approved my proposal for a district-wide history curriculum centered on the Underground Railroad, with the Hargrove station as our primary case study. Every 8th grader in the county will visit the site as part of their American history coursework." "That's fantastic," Jack said. "It guarantees steady visitor numbers and really establishes the educational importance of the site." "There's more," Rebecca continued. "They've offered me a position developing curriculum for historic sites across the district. It would mean leaving classroom teaching, but I'd be working directly with places like this to create meaningful educational experiences." "You should take it," Noah said immediately. "You've been talking about wanting a new challenge." Jack nodded in agreement. "You'd be perfect for that role. Your materials for this site are already being used as models by other historic properties." Rebecca smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "Well, if I took it, I'd be working closely with various historical sites in the region, including this one." The implication hung in the air between them. Over the past year, their relationship had evolved from the awkward politeness of divorced parents to genuine friendship, and lately, perhaps, something more. They had never directly addressed the possibility of reconciliation, but the foundation for it had been gradually rebuilding. "I think close collaboration would be beneficial for both sides," Jack replied with a matching smile, causing Noah to roll his eyes at their transparent attempt at professional language. You two are worse than the kids who flirt in the school. Always, he groaned, though his expression betrayed his approval. The following weekend brought unexpected visitors to the Hargrove site. Jack was leading a tour group through the main floor when he noticed 3 elderly African-American women waiting patiently near the visitor center. They weren't part of any scheduled tour, and something about their dignified presence suggested they hadn't come merely as casual visitors. After completing the tour, Jack approached them. "Welcome to the Hargrove Underground Railroad Station. I'm Jack Reynolds, the site director. Can I help you with anything?" The oldest of the women, her silver hair arranged in an elegant twist, extended her hand. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Dorothy Wilson. These are my sisters, Beatrice and Clara. We've come from Chicago after reading about this place in a historical preservation magazine. We believe our great-great-grandmother may have passed through here," Beatrice added. "Our family has oral histories about the journey from Kentucky to Canada, with mentions of a stone house with a hidden room somewhere in Pennsylvania." Jack felt a surge of excitement. In the year since the site's opening, they had welcomed thousands of visitors, including historians, politicians, and school groups. But this was the first time anyone had come with a potential direct connection to those who had used the Underground Railroad station. "Please come to my office," he said, leading them to the former kitchen. "We have detailed records from the hidden chamber that might help confirm your family connection." Over the next hour, Jack and Dr. Garcia, who had been called in specifically for this consultation, reviewed the Wilson sisters' family documents alongside the coded ledgers from the secret chamber. Their great-great-grandmother Esther had escaped from a plantation in Kentucky in 1857 with her 2 young children, eventually settling in Canada before moving to Chicago after the Civil War. "Here," Dr. Garcia said suddenly, pointing to an entry dated June 17, 1857. "The code refers to Woman E and 2 little ones from K territory. The dates align perfectly with your family records." Dorothy Wilson's hands trembled as she touched the page. She would have been 22 years old, with a 4-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. Family stories say she carried the children for miles when they couldn't walk anymore, never stopping even when her feet bled. "The journal entry here," Jack noted, turning to the corresponding date in Samuel Hargrove's personal records, mentions that the woman had educated herself in secret and could read and write, which was unusual and dangerous for an enslaved person at that time. "That fits too," Clara said proudly. "Our family has always emphasized education. Esther insisted her children and grandchildren learn to read and write. She established a small school in Chicago that served the black community for decades." As the sisters shared more family stories, Jack realized they were witnessing the rare intersection of documented history and living memory through oral tradition. He arranged for professional historians to conduct formal interviews with the Wilson sisters, preserving their family narratives as part of the Hargrove site's expanded collection. Before they left, Dorothy Wilson pressed something into Jack's hand. "This has been passed down through generations of our family. According to our grandmother, Esther left it in Canada with friends who were headed south again, asking them to deliver it to the Stone House family as a token of gratitude. They were unable to find the exact location, so it remained in our family instead." Jack opened his palm to find a small carved wooden heart, darkened with age but still intact. On one side were carved the initials EW, and on the other, a simple message, "Freedom's Path." "We'd like to donate it to your collection," Dorothy explained, "so it can finally complete the journey our great-great-grandmother intended." The wooden heart became the centerpiece of a new exhibit titled Freedom's Legacy, which traced the journeys of those who had passed through the Hargrove station and their subsequent impacts on American society. The Wilson sisters' story, along with their family photographs and documents, provided a powerful human connection to the historical records found in the hidden chamber. The National Evaluation Team arrived in early December, on a day when snow dusted the Hargrove property like powdered sugar. The team spent hours meticulously examining every aspect of the site, from the architectural restoration to the historical documentation to the educational programs. Jack, Dr. Garcia, and the entire staff fielded questions and provided detailed information about their preservation methods and historical research. At the conclusion of their visit, the lead evaluator, a distinguished historian from Georgetown University, gathered the staff in the main presentation room. "I've evaluated dozens of potential national landmarks during my career," he began, "but rarely have I seen a site that so perfectly balances historical significance, physical authenticity, and educational impact." The Hargrove Underground Railroad Station is not merely a preserved building, it's a living classroom that connects past moral courage to present social responsibility. 2 weeks later, the official designation came through. The Hargrove farmhouse was now a National Historic Landmark, ensuring its protection and prominence for generations to come. Local media covered the announcement extensively, featuring interviews with Jack, Noah, and other key figures in the site's discovery and restoration. The national recognition brought increased visitor numbers and additional funding opportunities. Jack found himself traveling to heritage preservation conferences across the country, sharing the story of the farmhouse's discovery and restoration. At each presentation, he emphasized that the site's value lay not just in its artifacts, but in the moral example it provided. The Hargrove family didn't act heroically for recognition or reward, he would explain. They did what they believed was right, at great personal risk, because they valued human freedom above their own safety. Their legacy reminds us that ordinary people, making choices based on conscience rather than convenience, can change the course of history. As winter deepened, Jack, Rebecca, and Noah settled into new routines. Rebecca had accepted the curriculum development position and now worked regularly with the Hargrove site and other historical properties in the region. Noah divided his time between school, where he excelled in history and social studies, and the farmhouse, where he had taken on increasing responsibility for specialized tours. Jack himself had grown into his role as site director with unexpected ease. The skills he had developed as a contractor, project management, resource allocation, team leadership, translated well to heritage site administration. He found deep satisfaction in overseeing the continued research, preservation, and educational programming that kept the Hargrove legacy alive. On Christmas Eve, exactly 14 months after Jack had discovered the hidden chamber, the three of them gathered in the farmhouse living room. With no tours scheduled for the holiday, they had the historic site to themselves. A small tree stood in the corner, decorated with period-appropriate ornaments researched by Noah for historical accuracy. Jack had prepared a special surprise. Earlier that week, he had received approval from the Board of Trustees for a new permanent exhibition that would tell not just the story of the Hargrove family and the Underground Railroad, but also the modern story of the site's rediscovery and restoration. "I have something for both of you," he said, handing Rebecca and Noah identical small boxes wrapped in simple brown paper tied with twine. They opened them simultaneously to find brass keys with wooden tags attached. Noah's read, Assistant Historical Director, while Rebecca's read, Director of Educational Programming. The board approved both positions starting in January, Jack explained. "Noah, yours is part-time until you finish school, of course, but it comes with a college scholarship for historical preservation studies. Rebecca, yours is full-time with the flexibility to continue your curriculum development work with other sites." Noah stared at his key in amazement. You mean I'll actually be on staff with real responsibilities? You've already been doing the work, Jack pointed out. This just makes it official and ensures you'll have the academic support to continue if that's what you choose. Rebecca's eyes glistened as she ran her finger over the engraved title on her tag. Jack, it's perfect. Thank you. There's one more thing, Jack said, his voice growing serious. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box that clearly wasn't a Christmas gift. This isn't a key to the farmhouse, it's something more personal. Rebecca's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a ring, not a diamond engagement ring, but a simple silver band with a small piece of polished wood inlaid at its center. The wood is from one of the original support beams. We had to replace during restoration, Jack explained. I had it made by a local artisan. It's not meant to replace what we had before, but to build something new that honors the foundation while creating something different. He took a deep breath. I'm not asking to go back to what we were. That chapter ended, and maybe it needed to. But this past year has shown me that we can build something new together, something solid and meaningful based on who we are now rather than who we were then. Dad, should I leave for this part? Noah asked, a mixture of embarrassment and delight on his face. Rebecca laughed, wiping away a tear. Absolutely not. This involves you too. She turned back to Jack. We've all changed this past year, found strengths we didn't know we had, built something together that matters. She took the ring from the box and slipped it onto her finger, where it fit perfectly. Yes, she said simply, to building something new together. Later that night, after Noah had gone to sleep in what had once been a guest bedroom and now served as his regular room at the farmhouse, Jack and Rebecca stood by the massive stone fireplace that had started it all. The hidden chamber, now secured with museum-quality preservation systems, remained closed for the holiday, but its presence informed every aspect of their lives. Do you ever think about how different things would be if you hadn't noticed that uneven mantelpiece? Rebecca asked, leaning against Jack's shoulder. All the time, he admitted. If I hadn't been desperate enough to buy this place with my last dollars, if I hadn't spent years training my eye to notice construction details, if I hadn't been stubborn enough to investigate further, everything would be different. You'd probably be working construction in another state, Rebecca mused. Noah would see you maybe a few times a year. I'd still be teaching the same curriculum I had for 10 years. And all this history would still be hidden away, Jack added, gesturing to the fireplace. The Hargrove family's courage, the stories of everyone who passed through here seeking freedom, the physical evidence of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It all might have been lost forever. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that note Margaret Jenkins left with the deed in 1952. When the time is right, it will reveal itself to one who values truth above treasure. Do you think she somehow knew? Jack considered the question. Not specifically, but I think she understood something important, that the real value of this place wasn't in its walls or land, but in the truth it contained. She was trusting that someday someone would see past the dilapidated exterior to recognize what really mattered. Just like I finally did with you, Rebecca said softly. Saw past the financial struggles to the man who always tried to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. Jack pulled her closer, watching the play of firelight on the ancient stones that had concealed such important secrets for so long. The farmhouse that no one had wanted, that he had purchased out of desperation with his last dollars, had become not just a nationally recognized historical landmark, but the foundation for rebuilding his family and his future. In the quiet of the Christmas night, with snow falling gently outside windows that had witnessed over a century of American history, Jack Reynolds understood that sometimes a person's lowest point, when they have nothing left to lose, is precisely when they become open to discovering treasures others have overlooked. Whether those treasures were historical artifacts hidden behind old stones or relationships that needed new foundations, the value lay in recognizing what truly mattered and having the courage to build something that would last. The seasons at the Hargrove property had shifted 3 times since Jack Reynolds had first inserted his key into the rusty lock of what seemed like a worthless farmhouse. The spring rains had given way to summer heat, then autumn's kaleidoscope of color, and, finally, winter's cleansing blanket of snow. Now, as the first crocuses pushed through the thawing ground behind the restored farmhouse, Jack found himself standing before a room full of university administrators, corporate donors, and state officials, preparing to unveil the next phase of what had become known nationally as the Hargrove Project. 3 years ago, Jack began, his voice steady with a confidence he once would have found unimaginable. This historic site was days away from potential demolition. The county had tried and failed for 15 years to find a buyer willing to take on what appeared to be a liability, a dilapidated structure with no apparent value. He paused, glancing at Noah and Rebecca, who sat in the front row, their expressions reflecting his own sense of wonder at how completely their lives had transformed. What we discovered behind that fireplace didn't just change the trajectory of this property, it changed our understanding of how resistance to injustice operated in this region during one of America's darkest chapters. On the wall behind Jack, a sophisticated digital display showed sliding before and after images of the farmhouse, from crumbling ruin to meticulously restored historical landmark. The presentation then shifted to photographs of the documents and artifacts found in the hidden chamber, each now properly preserved and catalogued in climate-controlled cases. Today, Jack continued, I'm honored to announce that Keystone State University, in partnership with the Hargrove Historical Foundation and the State Historical Preservation Office, is establishing the Center for Underground Railroad Studies, the first academic institute dedicated specifically to researching, documenting, and preserving the history of this secret network that helped hundreds of enslaved people journey toward freedom. Applause filled the university conference room as Jack yielded the podium to Dr. Garcia, who outlined the academic programming the center would offer: undergraduate and graduate courses, postdoctoral fellowships, community education initiatives, and ongoing archaeological investigations at suspected underground railroad sites throughout the region. Thomas Blackwood followed with details about the public-private partnership that would fund the center, a unique collaboration between government agencies, corporate donors, and private foundations that had been inspired by the extraordinary story of the Hargrove discovery. What began with Mr. Reynolds' improbable $800 investment has catalyzed over $12 million in preservation and educational funding, Blackwood noted, nodding respectfully toward Jack. As the formal presentation concluded and attendees mingled over refreshments, a distinguished older man approached Jack. His tailored suit and authoritative bearing suggested someone accustomed to wielding influence. Mr. Reynolds, he said, extending his hand. Richard Hargrove. I believe you've been preserving my family's legacy. Jack's surprise must have been evident as the man smiled with a hint of amusement. Distant relation, fourth cousin twice removed from Samuel Hargrove, or something equally convoluted. My branch of the family moved to Oregon in the 1890s, losing touch with the Pennsylvania Hargroves. I learned about your discovery through a PBS documentary last month. It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Hargrove, Jack replied, still processing this unexpected connection. We've been piecing together your family history through the documents and local records, but we haven't been able to trace any living descendants until now. Please call me Richard. and there aren't many of us left, no direct descendants. Of Samuel that I know of, just a few scattered branches from his siblings. He glanced around the room. I'd be interested in seeing the farmhouse, if that would be possible. I've come quite a distance. By mid-afternoon, Jack was giving Richard Hargrove a personal tour of the restored farmhouse. The elderly man moved through the rooms with quiet reverence, occasionally pausing to study architectural details or period furnishings that had been reinstalled based on inventory lists found among the hidden documents. My grandmother used to tell stories about her Pennsylvania cousins, Richard remarked as they entered the main living room with its massive stone fireplace. She said they were good people who did right when doing right was dangerous. As a child, I never understood what she meant. Jack activated the hidden mechanism, and the stone panel swung open to reveal the chamber that had changed everything. Despite the hundreds of times he had demonstrated this feature for visitors, the moment never lost its power, the tangible revelation of long-buried courage. Richard Hargrove stepped into the secret space, visibly moved. His fingers traced the shelving where the journals had been found, and he stood silently for several minutes, absorbing the reality of what his ancestors had risked. They never sought recognition, he finally said. Never left records that might have proven their moral courage to future generations. They simply did what conscience demanded, then concealed the evidence to protect others. That's what makes these records so extraordinary, Jack agreed. Most Underground Railroad operators destroyed any documentation that might incriminate them or endanger the network. The Hargroves' decision to preserve these materials but hide them so effectively that they remained undiscovered for over 150 years gives us unprecedented insight into how the system functioned. As they continued the tour, Richard asked thoughtful questions about the restoration process, the historical verification of the documents, and the educational programs now centered around the site. His keen interest and evident pride in his family's legacy reinforced for Jack the profound responsibility he had assumed when he chose preservation over personal profit after discovering the hidden chamber. Over dinner at Jack and Rebecca's cabin, the modest but comfortable home they had built at the edge of the property, separate from the historic site, Richard shared family photographs and letters that added personal dimension to the historical records. Though his branch of the family had not been directly involved in Underground Railroad activities, they had maintained the moral principles that had guided Samuel Hargrove's dangerous work. My grandfather was a civil rights attorney in Portland during the 1940s and 50s, Richard explained, showing a newspaper clipping about a landmark housing discrimination case. He faced death threats for representing black clients seeking to purchase homes in white neighborhoods. Now I understand where that moral backbone originated. Noah, fascinated by this living connection to the history he had helped preserve, peppered Richard with questions about family traditions and values that might have been passed down through generations. Rebecca observed the conversation with quiet satisfaction, occasionally catching Jack's eye with shared appreciation for their son's passionate engagement with history. As the evening concluded, Richard reached into his briefcase and removed a small wooden box with tarnished brass hinges. "I brought something that I believe belongs here," he said, placing it on the table. "My grandmother gave this to me when I was a young man, saying it had come from the Pennsylvania cousins and should remain in the family." Inside the box lay a pocket watch, its silver case engraved with the initials SH and the date, 1856. A small key, presumably for winding the timepiece, rested beside it. "Samuel Hargrove's watch," Richard continued. "My grandmother said it was sent west after his death in 1879, though she never knew why it had been separated from the Pennsylvania branch of the family. I'd like to donate it to your collection." Jack studied the watch with reverence, but shook his head. "This is a family heirloom, Mr. Hargrove. It belongs with you and your descendants." "I have no children," Richard replied with a gentle smile. "And more importantly, this watch belongs with the story it helped create. It should be displayed alongside the journals and maps, completing the historical record you've so carefully preserved." Later that night, after Richard had been driven back to his hotel and Noah had gone to bed, Jack and Rebecca sat on their porch, the box containing Samuel Hargrove's watch between them on a small table. "It's strange," Rebecca mused, "how objects carry history. 3 years ago, that watch was just a family heirloom gathering dust in Oregon. Now it's a tangible connection to a man whose moral courage helped hundreds escape bondage." Jack nodded, thinking about how perspective transformed value, how the worthless farmhouse had revealed priceless historical significance, how his seemingly catastrophic financial collapse had led to purpose and renewal, how a secret chamber, hidden for generations, was now educating thousands about resistance to injustice. "Richard wants to establish a scholarship," he told Rebecca. "The Hargrove Legacy Fund, for students researching Underground Railroad history or studying historical preservation. He's planning to endow it with $2 million. Rebecca's eyes widened. "That would secure the educational programming for generations." "That's his intention," Jack agreed. "He said his branch of the family prospered in Oregon through timber investments. Now, he wants that prosperity to honor the moral legacy of the Pennsylvania Hargroves." The following morning brought a flurry of activity to the historic site. A film crew from an international documentary series had arrived to shoot final footage for an episode featuring the Hargrove Station alongside other significant Underground Railroad sites. Dr. Garcia supervised as they captured detailed images of the documents and artifacts, ensuring historical accuracy in their presentation. Meanwhile, a group of architecture students from Keystone State University was conducting detailed measurements and analyses of the hidden chamber's construction as part of a study on concealed spaces in 19th century buildings. Their professor, a specialist in historic preservation techniques, had developed an entire course based on the Hargrove farmhouse restoration. Jack moved between these various activities, coordinating schedules and answering questions, still sometimes amazed at how many different disciplines now intersected at this once abandoned property. Architectural historians, document conservationists, archaeological specialists, educational programmers, digital archivists, all now brought their expertise to a site that the county couldn't give away 3 years earlier. As he passed through, the visitor center, once the farmhouse's summer kitchen, now converted to welcome incoming tour groups, Jack noticed a woman in her late 70s sitting alone on a bench near the entrance. Something in her posture, a dignified patience, caught his attention. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Welcome to the Hargrove Underground Railroad Station. Can I help you with anything?" She looked up, studying his face with clear, intelligent eyes. "You must be Jack Reynolds," she said with a slight smile. "I recognized you from the newspaper photographs. I'm Eleanor Jenkins Mitchell." The name registered immediately. "Jenkins? As in Margaret Hargrove Jenkins?" The woman nodded. "My grandmother. I believe you found a letter she left behind." Jack sat down beside her, momentarily speechless. After Richard Hargrove's unexpected appearance yesterday, this second connection to the farmhouse's history seemed almost surreal. "Your grandmother's letter has become one of our most meaningful artifacts," he finally managed. "Her trust that the right person would eventually find the hidden chamber. It's extraordinary." Eleanor Mitchell's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Grandmother Margaret was a remarkable judge of character, even across time. When she sold this property, she told my mother that someday, when the world was ready, someone would discover what the Hargroves had hidden. Not a treasure hunter," she said, "but someone who understands that truth is more valuable than gold." Over the next hour, as tour groups moved through the visitor center, Jack and Eleanor Mitchell sat in conversation, She had grown up hearing carefully guarded stories about her grandmother's family history, never specific enough to reveal underground railroad connections, but consistently emphasizing moral courage in difficult circumstances. Grandmother never told me explicitly about the hidden chamber, Eleanor explained, but she would talk about the truth in the walls and how someday it would speak to those willing to listen. After she died, I found notes she'd written about the farmhouse, but they were cryptic, locations and measurements that meant nothing to me then. Those might have been coordinates for finding the hidden chamber, Jack suggested. Would you be willing to share them with our research team? They could help us understand how the Hargrove family passed knowledge about the secret room through generations without creating written records that might be discovered. Eleanor nodded. I brought copies of everything I have. Newspaper clippings about the farmhouse, old photographs, grandmother's notes. I've been following your work here for the past year, ever since I saw an article about the discovery. It's taken me this long to gather the materials and make the trip from Arizona. Their conversation was interrupted by Noah, who approached with barely contained excitement. Dad, Dr. Garcia sent me to find you. The radar imaging team found something beneath the old barn foundation. The archaeological investigation of the Hargrove property had been ongoing for the past year, with ground-penetrating radar used to identify potential structures or features not visible on the surface. The barn, which had collapsed decades before Jack purchased the property, had been a focus of recent examination. Mrs. Mitchell, would you excuse me? Jack asked, torn between continuing this extraordinary conversation and responding to what might be another significant discovery. Of course, she replied with an understanding smile. I'll be here for several days. Perhaps you could introduce me to Dr. Garcia later. I'd like to share my grandmother's materials with someone who can properly evaluate their historical significance. Jack found Dr. Garcia and the archaeological team clustered around monitoring equipment set up near the stone foundation that had once supported the Hargrove barn. A series of stakes with bright orange flags marked a rectangular pattern approximately 8 feet by 12 feet. We've identified what appears to be a small root cellar or storage space beneath where the barn floor would have been, the lead archaeologist explained, showing Jack the radar images on her tablet. The interesting thing is that there's no visible entrance, no stairs or hatch in the remaining foundation. A second hidden chamber? Jack asked, immediately grasping the implications. Dr. Garcia nodded, her excitement evident despite her professional restraint. Potentially, given what we know about the Hargrove Station's operation, a concealed space beneath the barn would align with documented patterns at other underground railroad sites. Barns often provided initial hiding places because they offered legitimate reasons for food storage, fresh straw, and activity at odd hours. How soon can we investigate further? Jack asked. We'll need permits for excavation, the archaeologist cautioned, and we should complete additional scanning to ensure we have a complete picture before disturbing the site. Probably 2 weeks, before we could begin careful excavation. Those 2 weeks became a test of patience for everyone involved with the Hargrove project. Permit applications were expedited thanks to Thomas Blackwood's influence at the State Historical Preservation Office. Additional radar scans confirmed the dimensions of the underground space and identified what appeared to be a narrow tunnel connecting it to an area near the main house, a feature that suggested the possibility of moving people between hiding places without visible exterior movement. Eleanor Mitchell remained at the site, providing invaluable context through her family stories and documents. Richard Hargrove returned from Oregon, equally invested in this potential new discovery related to his ancestors. Together with Dr. Garcia and Walter Simmons, they formed an impromptu historical advisory committee, helping to interpret findings in the context of both documented history and family oral traditions. Noah, whose passion for the project had only intensified since his initial involvement, persuaded his school to count his participation in the archaeological investigation as an independent study project. He spent every afternoon at the site, assisting with documentation and eagerly absorbing knowledge from the professional team. Rebecca, meanwhile, began developing educational materials in anticipation of what they might discover, creating flexible curriculum elements that could be adapted based on the archaeological findings. Her work had expanded from local school programs to nationally distributed teaching resources, with the Hargrove site now featured in history textbooks across the country. On the morning scheduled for the initial excavation, a small crowd gathered at the barn foundation site. In addition to the archaeological team and the Hargrove Historical Committee, several state officials and university representatives attended, along with a carefully selected journalist who had demonstrated responsible reporting on previous historical discoveries. Jack watched as the archaeological team established a grid system over the targeted area, then began the painstaking process of removing layers of soil, screening every bucket for potential artifacts. By mid-morning, they had exposed the top of a stone-lined chamber approximately 3 feet below the current ground surface. By early afternoon, they had cleared enough material to reveal what appeared to be a wooden hatch, its surface darkened with age but remarkably intact given the decades it had spent underground. The soil composition and depth created an environment with limited oxygen and consistent temperature, the archaeologist explained to the observers. Combined with the quality of the original materials, these conditions preserved the structural elements far better than we might have expected. As the team prepared to open the hatch, a hush fell over the gathering. Jack found himself holding his breath, acutely aware that he was experiencing a moment of historical revelation comparable to his discovery of the fireplace chamber 3 years earlier. Noah stood beside him, camera ready to document whatever they might find. Rebecca grasped his other hand, her fingers tight with anticipation. With deliberate care, the archaeological team lifted the wooden hatch, revealing a set of narrow stairs descending into darkness. Specialized lighting was arranged to illuminate the space without creating damaging heat or UV exposure, and a small camera was lowered to capture initial images before anyone entered the fragile structure. The camera feed, displayed on monitors, set up nearby, showed a small room with earthen walls reinforced by timber supports. Unlike the fireplace chamber, which had contained primarily documents and small artifacts, this space held larger items. A simple wooden bench, several decaying blankets, a collection of earthenware jugs, and most significantly, a child's rag, doll placed carefully on a small shelf carved into the earth wall. This wasn't just a hiding place for documents, Dr. Garcia said quietly, examining the camera feed. This was where people waited, possibly for days, before continuing their journey north. The archaeological team spent the remainder of the day methodically documenting and retrieving the artifacts, each item carefully mapped before removal. The blankets, though deteriorated, retained enough material for textile analysis. The earthenware jugs might contain residues that could indicate their contents. The doll, its cloth face faded but still discernible, provided poignant evidence of the children who had passed through the Hargrove station. By evening, as the team secured the site for continued investigation the following day, Jack found himself sitting with Eleanor Mitchell and Richard Hargrove on the farmhouse porch, trying to process the day's discoveries. "The doll," Eleanor said softly, "reminds us that these weren't just historical events, they were human experiences. A child carried that doll along the Underground Railroad, perhaps leaving it behind intentionally, perhaps forgetting it in the haste of continuing. Their journey. Richard nodded, his expression solemn. I keep thinking about the courage it took, not just for those escaping bondage, but for my ancestors who harbored them. The legal penalties were severe, yet they built these elaborate hiding places and risked everything to help strangers. That's what makes the Hargrove station so remarkable, Jack agreed. Most underground railroad sites have been identified through historical records or oral traditions, with little physical evidence remaining. Here, we have not only the documents from the fireplace chamber, but now an actual hiding place with artifacts left by those who passed through. The archaeological investigation continued for weeks, expanding to trace the tunnel that connected the barn hiding place to an area near the main house. This passage, approximately 20 inches wide and 4 feet high, had been carefully constructed with timber supports and ventilation channels disguised as rodent burrows. It emerged in what had once been a root cellar attached to the kitchen, providing a way for people to move between hiding places without being observed from outside. Each discovery added dimension to the historical understanding of how the Underground Railroad had functioned at the Hargrove station. The journals found in the fireplace chamber provided dates, numbers, and coded information about routes. The barn chamber and tunnel offered physical evidence of the practical challenges involved in concealing people seeking freedom. Together, they created the most complete picture yet documented of a rural underground railroad operation. News of the barn chamber discovery spread rapidly through academic circles and then to national media. The Hargrove site, already recognized for its historical significance, now became the focus of renewed attention. Visitor numbers doubled, then tripled. Schools from across the country arranged field trips. Researchers requested access to the growing collection of artifacts and documents. Jack found himself navigating this sudden expansion with a confidence that would have seemed impossible during his desperate days as a failed contractor. The skills he had developed managing construction projects translated effectively to heritage site administration, budget oversight, team coordination, problem solving, and attention to detail all proved valuable in his new role. More personally meaningful was the transformation in his family relationships. Noah had found his academic passion through involvement with the Hargrove project, now planning to study public history and museum administration in college. Rebecca had rediscovered her love of curriculum development, creating educational materials that would shape how students across the country understood this chapter of American history. And their relationship, once fractured by financial stress and diverging priorities, had rebuilt around shared purpose and mutual respect. As autumn approached, bringing brilliant color to the trees surrounding the Hargrove property, Jack received an unexpected phone call from the governor's office. The annual State Preservation Awards ceremony, typically focused on architectural restoration, would this year honor the Hargrove project with a special recognition for historical significance. More surprisingly, the governor wanted to use the occasion to announce a major initiative: the establishment of a state-funded underground railroad heritage trail linking documented sites across Pennsylvania with the Hargrove station as its centerpiece. The ceremony, held at the state capitol, brought together everyone who had contributed to the Hargrove project's success: Dr. Garcia and her research team, Thomas Blackwood and the preservation officials who had expedited funding and permits, the archaeological team responsible for excavating the barn chamber, Eleanor Mitchell and Richard Hargrove, representing the family whose courage had created this legacy, and most importantly to Jack, Noah, and Rebecca, whose belief in the project had sustained him through the challenges of transformation from abandoned ruin to national historical treasure. When Jack stepped to the podium to accept the award, he found himself reflecting on the improbable journey that had brought him to this moment. 3 years ago, he began, I stood at a county auction with $850 to my name, nearly everything I had left after losing my business, my home, and very nearly my family. Everyone present that day, including me, thought I was making a desperate mistake by bidding on an abandoned farmhouse that had been vacant for decades. What looked like rock bottom, a last futile attempt to salvage something from financial ruin, turned out to be the foundation for something I never could have imagined. He paused, glancing at Noah and Rebecca in the front row, drawing strength from their proud expressions. What the Hargrove Project has taught me is that value isn't always visible on the surface. The most significant things are often hidden behind old stones, beneath weathered floorboards, or in the quiet courage of ordinary people making extraordinary moral choices. Jack gestured toward Eleanor Mitchell and Richard Hargrove. The Hargrove family never sought recognition for their dangerous work helping people escape bondage. They acted from moral conviction, then carefully concealed the evidence to protect the network and those it served. The audience listened attentively as Jack continued, connecting the historical significance of the Hargrove station to contemporary resonance. The documents we found in the hidden fireplace chamber and the artifacts from the barn hiding place don't just tell us about the past, they challenge us in the present. They remind us that in every era, people face moral choices between convenience and conscience, between complicity with injustice and courage to resist it. The Hargroves chose courage, often at great personal risk. Their legacy asks what choices we're making in our own time. Following the ceremony, at a reception hosted by the governor, Jack found himself surrounded by people eager to discuss the Hargrove Project's future. University presidents offered research partnerships, museum directors proposed traveling exhibitions. Corporate executives spoke of funding opportunities. What had begun as one man's desperate purchase of an abandoned homestead had evolved into a catalyst for historical preservation across the state. Late that evening, as Jack, Rebecca, and Noah drove back toward Pinewood Valley, Noah broke the comfortable silence from the back seat. "Remember when you first showed me the hidden chamber? You said you weren't sure what would happen with the farmhouse, but you knew it was important." Jack nodded, glancing at his son in the rearview mirror. "I had no idea how it would unfold. I just knew we'd found something that mattered, something that needed to be preserved rather than sold or exploited." "That's why this worked," Rebecca said quietly. "You recognized value beyond price. You understood that some things belong to history, not to individuals." In the months that followed, the Hargrove Underground Railroad Station expanded in both physical footprint and historical significance. The state funding that accompanied the Heritage Trail designation enabled construction of a proper visitor center adjacent to the historic structures, relieving pressure on the farmhouse itself. The archaeological investigation continued, revealing additional features of the property's operation during its years as a station on the journey to freedom. Perhaps most meaningfully, the Hargrove Family Reconciliation Project emerged as an unexpected outgrowth of the historical research. Inspired by the Wilson sisters' connection to the site, other descendants of people documented in the Hargrove journals began to come forward. Meanwhile, through Eleanor Mitchell's family connections and genealogical research, more distant branches of the Hargrove family were identified and contacted. The first reconciliation weekend brought together over 60 people, descendants of those who had operated the Underground Railroad station and descendants of those who had passed through it, seeking freedom. They shared family stories, historical documents, and the powerful experience of standing together in spaces where their ancestors had intersected in acts of courage and humanity during America's darkest chapter. Jack, watching these extraordinary reunions from a respectful distance, felt the profound significance of what had grown from his desperate purchase 3 years earlier. The abandoned homestead that no one had wanted that he had bought with his last $850 when he had nothing left to lose, had become not just a historical landmark, but a place of connection across time and across the divisions of American history. On the final evening of the reconciliation weekend, as families gathered on the property for a candlelight ceremony, honoring both those who had sought freedom and those who had risked everything to help them achieve it, Jack stood with Rebecca and Noah near the restored barn foundation. The archaeological team had stabilized and partially reconstructed the underground chamber, installing a glass viewing floor that allowed visitors to see the space where freedom seekers had waited, sometimes for days, before continuing their dangerous journey north. "I've been thinking," Jack said quietly to his family, "about what happens next for us." Rebecca looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "The Hargrove site is established now. The state funding is secure, the preservation is ongoing, the educational programs are thriving. It doesn't need me managing every detail anymore." Noah frowned slightly. "You're thinking of leaving after everything we've built here?" Jack shook his head. "Not leaving, evolving. There are other historic properties at risk of being lost, other places with stories that need preservation. I've been approached about consulting on endangered sites across the region." "A new challenge," Rebecca said, understanding in her voice, "using what we've learned here to help other communities preserve their history." Jack nodded. The construction, skills, the grant writing experience, the preservation knowledge, all of it could help save other sites before they're demolished or deteriorate beyond recovery. "We could still base operations here," Noah suggested, immediately engaging with the concept. "Use the Hargrove site as a model and training facility for preservation techniques." As they discussed possibilities, Jack felt a sense of completion mingled with anticipation. The cycle that had begun with his financial collapse and desperate purchase had come full circle. He had transformed an abandoned homestead into a nationally significant historical site. In the process, it had transformed him from a failed contractor to a recognized authority on historical preservation. Looking across the property at the restored farmhouse with its hidden chamber now carefully preserved for education, at the reconstructed barn foundation with its underground hiding place, at the new visitor center welcoming people from across the country, at the families connected through the reconciliation project, Jack Reynolds understood that sometimes a person's lowest point contains the seeds of their greatest contribution. He had spent his last $850 on an abandoned homestead that no one wanted, discovering a secret vault hidden behind the fireplace. That desperate decision, made when he had nothing left to lose, had revealed treasures far more valuable than gold. Historical artifacts that changed our understanding of the past, human connections that bridged generations of separation, and perhaps most personally, a path forward that aligned his skills with purpose larger than himself. As the candles flickered across the gathering, illuminating faces that might never have connected without the Hargrove discovery, Jack reflected that the most significant treasures we find are rarely those we set out seeking. Sometimes they're hidden behind old stones in abandoned places, waiting for someone with the eyes to see value where others see only ruin. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these. Just click and check them out.